The Hidden Scholar, a Victorian Romance. The rain fell in silver sheets against the tall windows of Ashworth Manor, each droplet tracing its solitary path down the ancient glass like tears upon a widow's cheek. Miss Eleanor Ashworth pressed her palm against the cool pane, watching the world dissolve into watercolour greys and greens beyond her prison of propriety. At 23, she had long since accepted that her life would be measured not in dreams fulfilled but in disappointments endured. Eleanor, step away from that window at once. What if someone should see you standing there like a common housemaid? Her mother's shrill voice cut through the peaceful patter of rain, and Eleanor withdrew her hand as though the glass had burned her. She turned to face Lady Ashworth, whose severe countenance was made more formidable by the tight arrangement of her greying hair and the rigid set of her silk-clad shoulders. "Yes, mamma," Eleanor murmured, clasping her hands before her in the attitude of submission she had perfected over years of practice. "I cannot fathom what possesses you to such peculiar behaviour," Lady Ashworth continued, her lips pursed in perpetual disapproval. "Your sisters never gave me a moment's trouble. Beatrice made a splendid match with Lord Pemberton, and even young Catherine has attracted the attention of the Viscount's son. But you—" she paused, her eyes narrowing as they swept over Eleanor's plain muslin dress and unadorned hair. "You persist in this wilful peculiarity that brings nothing but shame upon this family." Eleanor bit her lower lip, fighting the urge to defend herself. What would be the use? She had tried, in the beginning, to make her family understand. She had attempted to explain the fierce hunger that consumed her when she held a book, the way words could paint entire worlds behind her eyes, the conversations she longed to have about poetry and philosophy and the great works of literature that seemed to matter to no one but herself. Her father, Lord Ashworth, had been the first to dismiss her aspirations. "Education ruins a woman for marriage," he had declared over dinner one evening, his jowls quivering with the force of his conviction. "No man of good breeding wants a wife who thinks herself his intellectual equal. It is unnatural. It is unwomanly. It is absolutely out of the question." When Eleanor had persisted, sneaking volumes from her father's library and reading by candlelight long after the household had retired, her punishment had been swift and severe. The servants had been instructed to monitor her movements. Her small collection of beloved books, gifts from a kindly aunt who had since passed, had been confiscated and burned in the morning-room fireplace while Eleanor was forced to watch. "These dangerous ideas must be purged," her mother had said, her face illuminated by the flames consuming Wordsworth and Shelley, Shakespeare and Milton. "We do this for your own good, child. You must be made fit for society, for marriage, for the only purpose that matters for a woman of your station." That had been 2 years ago. Since then, Eleanor had been kept on an even tighter leash. She was forbidden to leave the manor without escort, prevented from attending any but the most necessary social functions, and monitored constantly lest she should somehow corrupt her younger sister with her peculiar notions. The family spoke of her in hushed, embarrassed tones, as though she were an invalid suffering from some shameful disease. "I have done my best with you," Lady Ashworth said now, her voice heavy with theatrical suffering. "But your time is running out, Eleanor. You are no longer a girl. You are rapidly approaching an age where no respectable man will have you. Your father has been more than patient, but even his tolerance has limits." "Yes, mamma," Eleanor repeated, the words hollow in her mouth. "You will remain in your rooms for the remainder of the day," Lady Ashworth declared. "Perhaps solitude will encourage more seemly thoughts. And Eleanor," she paused at the doorway, her hand resting on the frame, "you would do well to remember that your stubbornness affects not only yourself but the prospects of your sister. Catherine's reputation could be tainted by association with your eccentricities." The door closed with a decisive click, and Eleanor was alone once more. She waited, counting heartbeats, until she was certain her mother had descended the stairs. Then she moved to the corner of her room where a loose floorboard concealed her greatest secret and her only solace. With practised fingers, She pried up the board and withdrew a single slim volume, a collection of poems by Elizabeth Barrett Browning that she had managed to save from the burning. It was her last connection to the world of ideas and beauty that had once seemed within her reach. She held it to her chest like a talisman, feeling the familiar weight of it, the slight roughness of the cloth binding, the promise contained within its pages. Eleanor settled into the window-seat, drawing her knees up beneath her skirts, and opened the book to a random page. The words swam before her eyes, blurred by tears she refused to shed. She would not cry. She had spent too many nights in tears already, mourning the life she would never lead, the conversations she would never have, the person she might have become if she had been born into a different family or a different world. The afternoon stretched before her like a vast, empty plain. Outside, the rain continued its melancholy song against the windows of Ashworth Manor, and inside, Eleanor read the same poems she had memorized long ago, seeking comfort in their familiar rhythms even as her heart ached with longing for something more. The rain had ceased by evening, leaving the world scrubbed clean and glittering with moisture. Eleanor stood at her window, watching the last light fade from the sky, when a commotion in the drive below caught her attention. A magnificent carriage, black lacquered and bearing an unfamiliar coat of arms, had arrived at the manor. She watched as servants rushed forth with umbrellas and lanterns, forming a corridor of light for the distinguished visitor who emerged. Even from her elevated position, Eleanor could see that he was a gentleman of some importance. His bearing spoke of absolute confidence, his clothing of impeccable taste and considerable wealth. He moved with the grace of a man accustomed to command, and when he glanced up at the manor's facade, Eleanor caught a glimpse of a handsome face with strong, aristocratic features. She stepped back from the window quickly, her heart unaccountably racing. Unexpected visitors were rare at Ashworth Manor, particularly ones who arrived in such state. Curiosity warred with caution in her breast, but ultimately curiosity won. She pressed her ear to her chamber door, listening for any hint of what was transpiring below. Voices drifted up from the entrance hall, her father's booming tones, her mother's artificially sweetened speech, and a third voice, deep and cultured, that she did not recognize. The words were indistinct, but she caught fragments: shelter for the evening, wheel damage, most grateful. A stranded traveler, then. Eleanor's mind raced with the possibilities. If the gentleman was staying for the evening, there would be dinner, conversation, perhaps even, she hardly dared hope, the sort of discourse that had been absent from her life for so long. Surely even her parents would not deny their guest the pleasure of meeting all the family members? But her hope was short-lived. Within moments she heard her mother's voice in the corridor, speaking to one of the servants. "Inform Miss Catherine that we shall have a distinguished guest for dinner. She is to wear her blue silk and conduct herself with utmost propriety. The gentleman is unmarried, and this is precisely the sort of opportunity we have been awaiting." No mention of Eleanor. Of course not. She was the family's shame, to be hidden away lest her peculiarities embarrass them before important company. Eleanor leaned her forehead against the door, swallowing the bitter taste of disappointment. She listened as the household bustled with preparations, as Catherine's excited chatter echoed in the hallway, as everyone forgot entirely about the daughter locked away in the east wing. The dinner hour came and went. Eleanor ate the cold tray that was brought to her room, her imagination torturing her with visions of the lively conversation unfolding in the dining-room below, conversation in which she had no part. It was near midnight when Eleanor, unable to sleep, decided to risk a visit to the one place that might offer comfort, the library. Her father's library was extensive, a collection built by generations of Ashworth men who had valued learning even if they did not value it in their daughters. Eleanor was forbidden from entering it, but she knew the servants' routines, knew which floorboards creaked and which hallways were least frequented at this hour. She wrapped a dark shawl around her nightdress and ventured forth, moving through the silent house like a ghost. The library was located on the ground floor, in the south wing. To reach it, she had to pass through the portrait gallery, descend the main staircase, and traversed the length of the morning-room. Each step was fraught with danger. If she were discovered, there would be consequences she did not wish to contemplate. But fortune favored her, and she reached the library door without incident. The heavy oak swung open on well-oiled hinges, and Eleanor slipped inside, closing it softly behind her. The room was dark save for the moonlight streaming through the tall windows, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. The familiar scent of leather and paper enveloped her like an embrace. She moved toward the shelves by memory, running her fingers along the spines until she found what she sought, a volume of Byron's poetry that she had long wished to read. She withdrew it carefully and turned toward the window-seat, intending to read by moonlight for a precious stolen hour. She had taken only 3 steps when a voice emerged from the darkness near the fireplace, nearly stopping her heart. "I see I am not the only soul unable to find rest this evening." Eleanor gasped, the book tumbling from her nerveless fingers. A figure rose from one of the high-backed chairs, the stranger, the guest, the gentleman from the carriage. He moved into the moonlight, and Eleanor saw him clearly for the first time. A man of perhaps 30 years, with dark hair swept back from a broad forehead, penetrating grey eyes, and features that combined strength with a certain refinement. He was in his shirt-sleeves, his cravat loosened, a glass of brandy in one hand and an open book in the other. "Forgive me," he said, his voice carrying genuine concern. "I did not mean to startle you. I could not sleep and took the liberty of borrowing a book from Lord Ashworth's collection. I assumed the household had retired for the evening." Eleanor stood frozen, her mind a chaos of panic and confusion. She should flee. She should call for help. She should do anything but stand here in her night-clothes before a strange gentleman. But her feet seemed rooted to the floor, and her voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. I should not be here." "Nor should I, strictly speaking," the gentleman replied with a slight smile. "Borrowing books without permission is generally frowned upon, even for house guests. Shall we agree to keep each other's secrets?" He bent to retrieve the volume Eleanor had dropped, his movements graceful and unhurried. When he straightened, he examined the spine by moonlight, and his expression changed, surprise giving way to something that might have been approval. "Byron," he said softly. "An excellent choice, though somewhat scandalous for a young lady, or so society would have us believe." He extended the book toward her. "But then, if you are here at midnight, I suspect you care little for society's narrow prescriptions." Eleanor took the book with trembling hands, still unable to form a coherent response. Who was this man who spoke to her not with censure but with something approaching understanding? Who quoted Byron in the darkness and seemed to find her presence in the library neither shocking nor improper? "You must be another of Lord Ashworth's daughters," he continued when she remained silent. "Though I confess I was told he had only the 2, Miss Catherine, whom I met at dinner, and an elder daughter who was indisposed." "I am Eleanor," she managed, finding her voice at last. "The indisposed daughter, as you say, though my affliction is not what you might suppose." "Nor do I suppose it," he replied. "I imagine your only affliction is an inconvenient love of literature in a household that does not value it. I have seen such cases before." His perception was so accurate, so immediate, that Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. How could this stranger understand in moments what her own family had refused to acknowledge in years? She clutched the book of Byron's poetry to her chest like a shield, unsure whether to run or to stay, to speak or to remain silent. "I am being presumptuous," the gentleman said, his tone gentling. "And you are quite right to be wary of a stranger in the dark. But allow me to introduce myself properly, and perhaps you will feel less alarmed. I am Alexander Ravenswood, Duke of Thornfield. My carriage suffered damage on the road, and your parents have been gracious enough to offer me shelter for the night." A duke! Eleanor's mind reeled. Her parents had not mentioned hosting such an important personage, though that explained the fine carriage and the special attention at dinner. She executed an awkward curtsy, still clutching her book, acutely aware of her inappropriate dress and loose hair. "Your Grace," she murmured, "I apologize for intruding upon your privacy. I will leave you to your reading." "Wait," Ravenswood said as she turned toward the door. "Please. I have spent the evening in tedious conversation about crop yields and the weather. I find myself hungering for discourse of a different variety. Would you, that is, if it would not be too improper, would you stay and talk with me? About books, about Byron, about anything of substance." Eleanor turned back, searching his face for any sign of mockery or ulterior motive. She found only genuine interest and what might have been loneliness. Here was a man, a duke no less, asking her to discuss literature, the very thing she had been denied for so long. Every rule of propriety screamed that she should refuse, that she should flee to her chamber and forget this encounter ever happened. But when she spoke, she said simply, "Yes, I would like that very much." They sat in the window seat, separated by a careful distance but united by their shared passion. The Duke had brought candles from the mantel, setting them on the sill so they could see the pages before them. Eleanor had never known an hour to pass so quickly or so richly. Ravenswood spoke of Byron with an intimacy that suggested deep familiarity, not merely with the words but with the passions and philosophies behind them. He discussed the Romantic movement, its rebellion against rigid neoclassicism, its emphasis on emotion and individual experience. Eleanor, starved for such conversation, found herself responding with thoughts and observations she had harbored for years, never imagining she would have the opportunity to voice them. "You have a keen critical eye," Ravenswood said after she had offered an interpretation of one of Byron's more complex passages. "Have you studied literature formally?" Eleanor shook her head, a familiar bitterness creeping into her voice. "I have studied nothing formally. Everything I know, I have gleaned from stolen moments and forbidden books. My family believes education ruins a woman for marriage." "Then your family, begging their pardon, are fools," Ravenswood replied with such conviction that Eleanor looked up in surprise. "The notion that learning diminishes femininity is one of the great absurdities of our age. Some of the finest minds I have encountered belong to women. Mary Wollstonecraft, Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters. To deny half of humanity access to education is to impoverish all of humanity." "You cannot imagine how strange it is to hear such words," Eleanor said softly. "I had begun to believe myself mad for wanting what everyone insisted I should not." "You are not mad," Ravenswood assured her. "You are simply cursed with intelligence and curiosity in an age that finds both threatening in women. But Eleanor, may I call you Eleanor? If you hunger for knowledge, if you wish to truly study literature, I could help you." Eleanor's heart leapt, but caution held her back. "How?" "You are a guest here for one night only. By morning, your carriage will be repaired, and you will continue on your way. We shall never meet again." "Perhaps," Ravenswood said, and something in his tone suggested he was formulating a plan even as he spoke. "Or perhaps fate has brought us together for a purpose. I shall be honest with you, Eleanor. I am in this part of the country for several weeks, settling matters on an estate I recently inherited. It is but a short ride from here, perhaps an hour on horseback. If you could find a way to leave the manor occasionally, I could tutor you, properly, comprehensively, in all the literature you have been denied." "It's impossible," Eleanor said, even as hope bloomed treacherously in her chest. "I am watched constantly. My movements are monitored. I am practically a prisoner in my own home." "Where there is will, there is often way," Ravenswood countered. "Surely there must be some activity that would allow you to leave the house? A charitable visit, perhaps, or a call upon a neighbor." Eleanor thought frantically. "There is an old woman, Mrs. Hartley, who lives in a cottage on the edge of our property. She was my nursemaid years ago, before her retirement. My mother considers it appropriate for me to visit her occasionally, an act of Christian charity toward a former servant. But even then, I am usually accompanied by my maid." And could this maid be trusted to keep a confidence? Eleanor considered. Mary, her lady's maid, had been with her for 3 years. She was a kindly woman, sympathetic to Eleanor's plight, but asking her to actively deceive Lord and Lady Ashworth was another matter entirely. Still, Mary had been the one to save the volume of Browning from the flames, had been the one to help Eleanor conceal it. Perhaps. "I believe she could," Eleanor said slowly. "If I explained the situation properly, if I made clear that we were doing nothing improper." "There would be nothing improper," Ravenswood assured her. "I would arrange for us to meet at a neutral location, perhaps the old chapel near Mrs. Hartley's cottage. I noticed it on my journey here. We would spend an hour or two in study, nothing more. You have my word as a gentleman that your reputation would remain unsullied." It was madness. It was dangerous. If they were discovered, the scandal would destroy not only Eleanor but potentially Catherine's prospects as well. Her parents would never forgive her. She might be sent away entirely, locked up in some remote location where her peculiarities could embarrass the family no longer. And yet, when Eleanor looked into Ravenswood's eyes and saw the sincerity there, when she imagined weeks of learning and conversation and intellectual companionship, the temptation was overwhelming. This might be her only chance, perhaps her last chance, to experience the education she craved. "I will do it," she heard herself say. "I will find a way." Ravenswood smiled, and it transformed his entire countenance from merely handsome to something luminous. "Then we shall begin 3 days hence. That will give me time to gather appropriate materials and you time to make the necessary arrangements. Shall we say Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock at the old chapel?" "Tuesday at 2, Eleanor agreed, her heart racing with equal parts terror and exhilaration. They spoke for another hour, planning the details of their arrangement, before reluctantly agreeing that they must part lest the household begin to stir. Ravenswood escorted Eleanor to the library door, pausing there to take her hand in a gesture that was both formal and unexpectedly intimate. "I look forward to our lessons with great anticipation," he said, his thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles before he released her. "You have a remarkable mind, Eleanor Ashworth. It would be a crime against nature to let it languish unused." Eleanor fled to her chamber, her hand tingling where he had touched it, her mind awhirl with everything that had transpired. She had no idea how she would manage what she had promised, but she was determined to try. For the first time in years, she had something to look forward to, someone who saw value in her mind rather than shame. She did not sleep that night. Instead, she sat at her window, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to the soft pink of dawn, and planned her escape into knowledge. The next 3 days passed in an agony of impatience and anxiety. Eleanor approached Mary the morning after the Duke's departure, catching her alone in the dressing-room while arranging Eleanor's modest wardrobe. "Mary," Eleanor began, her voice low and urgent, "I must ask something of you, something that requires absolute discretion and trust." The maid looked up, her round face creasing with concern. "Miss Eleanor, you know I would do anything for you. What troubles you?" Eleanor took a deep breath and explained everything. The midnight meeting, the Duke's offer, the opportunity for education that she had thought forever beyond her reach. She watched Mary's expression shift from surprise to worry to, finally, a kind of cautious sympathy. "It's dangerous, miss," Mary said when Eleanor had finished. "If your parents were to discover—" "I know the risks," Eleanor interrupted. "But, Mary, you saved my Browning volume. You understand how much literature means to me. This may be my only chance to truly learn, to have the education I've always dreamed of. Please, will you help me?" Mary worried her lower lip between her teeth, her hands twisting in her apron. Finally, she nodded. "I'll help you, miss." But we must be careful. Very careful indeed. Together, they devised a plan. Eleanor would request permission to visit Mrs. Hartley on Tuesday afternoon, ostensibly to bring the elderly woman some preserves and to read to her from the Bible, an act of charity that Lady Ashworth would surely approve. Mary would accompany her as chaperone, as was proper. They would indeed visit Mrs. Hartley, but only briefly, before continuing to the old chapel where the Duke awaited. We'll say that Mrs. Hartley wanted to visit her sister's grave in the chapel yard, Mary suggested. It's plausible enough, and it gives us reason to be there. The plan was solid, but Eleanor's nerves were stretched taut as a violin string as Tuesday approached. She jumped at every sound, certain that somehow her parents had divined her intentions. At meals, she forced herself to eat, to speak when spoken to give no indication of the secret excitement that thrummed through her veins like a second pulse. Catherine, oblivious as always, chattered endlessly about the Duke's visit, lamenting that he had departed before she could make more of an impression. "Such a handsome man," she sighed over breakfast on Monday morning. "And wealthy beyond measure, they say. Mother was most displeased that he showed no particular interest in me. She had hoped— well, you know how Mother is." Eleanor knew indeed. Her mother's matrimonial ambitions for Catherine were boundless, and the appearance of an unmarried duke had no doubt sent Lady Ashworth into paroxysms of matchmaking fervour. If only she knew that the Duke had spent more time conversing with the hidden, unmarriageable Eleanor than with the eligible, pretty Catherine. Tuesday dawned clear and bright, the autumn sun painting the world in shades of amber and gold. Eleanor dressed with particular care, choosing a simple but becoming gown of deep blue that Mary assured her brought out the color of her eyes. She told herself it was merely a matter of presenting herself respectably for an educational engagement, but her racing heart suggested a different truth. "You look lovely, miss," Mary said softly as she arranged Eleanor's hair in a simple chignon. "Truly lovely." Eleanor met her own gaze in the mirror and barely recognized the woman who looked back. There was color in her cheeks, light in her eyes, an animation to her features that had been absent for so long. Hope, she realized, had transformed her. Securing permission to visit Mrs. Hartley proved easier than Eleanor had anticipated. Lady Ashworth, preoccupied with arrangements for an upcoming dinner party, waved her hand in dismissive approval. "Yes, yes, go and perform your charitable duty. But do not linger. I shall need you to help address invitations this evening." Eleanor and Mary set out shortly after luncheon, carrying a basket of preserves and a worn Bible as props for their supposed mission. The walk to Mrs. Hartley's cottage took 20 minutes, following a winding path through the Ashworth woods. The old woman was delighted by their visit, her weathered face creasing into 1,000 smiles as she welcomed them inside. "Miss Eleanor, what a pleasure, child. And you've brought Mary with you. Come in, come in. I'll put the kettle on." They stayed for 15 minutes, Eleanor reading a brief passage from Psalms while Mrs. Hartley listened with closed eyes and clasped hands. Then Mary, with admirable skill at deception, mentioned that Mrs. Hartley's sister's grave was nearby. "Would you like us to visit it, ma'am? To say a prayer there and make sure it's being properly tended?" "Oh, would you, dears? That would ease my mind greatly. My old bones don't carry me that far any more, but I do worry about poor Sarah's resting place." And so they had their excuse. They bid Mrs. Hartley farewell and continued along the path toward the old chapel that stood on a hill overlooking the valley. Eleanor's heart hammered so loudly she was certain Mary must hear it. What if the Duke had not come? What if he had reconsidered, decided that tutoring an insignificant country girl was beneath his dignity? What if this had all been some elaborate jest at her expense? But as they crested the hill and the chapel came into view, Eleanor saw a familiar figure standing near the entrance. Ravenswood was dressed simply, in riding clothes rather than the formal attire he had worn at the manor, but he carried himself with the same unconscious authority. When he saw them approaching, his face lit with genuine pleasure. "Miss Ashworth," he said, bowing formally. "And this must be the trusted Mary. I am grateful to you both for your courage in coming." Mary bobbed a curtsy, her eyes wide. She had never been in such close proximity to a duke before, and Eleanor could see her struggling between awe and protective wariness. "Your Grace," Mary said carefully, "I hope you understand that I'm here to ensure Miss Eleanor's reputation remains intact. Begging your pardon, sir, but if there's any impropriety—" "There will be none," Ravenswood assured her. "You have my word. You are welcome to remain within sight at all times, if that would ease your concerns. I wish only to provide Miss Ashworth with the education she desires and deserves." Mary seemed somewhat mollified, though she maintained her watchful demeanor. Ravenswood led them into the chapel, which, though long abandoned for regular services, was still structurally sound and furnished with a few ancient pews. He had brought a small trunk of books, which he opened to reveal treasures that made Eleanor gasp. "I thought we might begin with an overview of English literature," he said, withdrawing volume after volume. "From Chaucer to the present day. We can study the evolution of language, form, and theme. And if you wish to delve into philosophy, history, or the sciences as well, I have connections to procure additional materials." Eleanor could barely speak. She ran her fingers reverently over the spines. Shakespeare's collected works, volumes of Donne and Marlowe, novels by Richardson and Fielding, poetry by Pope and Dryden. It was a fortune in books, and he had brought them all for her. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say that you're ready to begin," Ravenswood replied with a smile. And so began the most extraordinary weeks of Eleanor's life. Twice each week, she and Mary made their pilgrimage to the old chapel, ostensibly to tend to Mrs. Hartley and her sister's grave, but in truth to pursue knowledge with a hunger that astonished even Eleanor herself. Ravenswood proved to be an exceptional teacher, patient, thorough, and genuinely excited by Eleanor's insights and questions. They began with the foundations, Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, which Ravenswood read aloud in Middle English, his voice transforming the ancient words into music. He taught her to parse the language, to understand the historical context, to see how Chaucer had captured an entire society in his Pilgrim stories. From there, they moved through the Renaissance, the sonnets of Shakespeare, the metaphysical poetry of Donne, the epic grandeur of Milton's Paradise Lost. Ravenswood did not simply lecture. He engaged Eleanor in discussion, challenging her interpretations, encouraging her to think critically and defend her positions. He treated her not as a student to be condescended to, but as an intellectual equal whose opinions had value. "What do you make of Milton's Satan?" he asked during one lesson, his gray eyes intent on her face. "Is he hero or villain?" Eleanor considered, turning the question over in her mind. "Both, perhaps? Milton makes him magnificent in his defiance, sympathetic in his suffering. And yet his pride is his destruction. He chooses damnation rather than submit, and in doing so, he becomes the architect of all human sorrow. It's a warning, I think, about the dangers of unchecked ambition." "Brilliant," Ravenswood said, and the approval in his voice made Eleanor's chest warm with pride. "Blake said that Milton was of the devil's party without knowing it, but I think Milton knew exactly what he was doing. He made Satan compelling precisely to show us how seductive evil can be when dressed in the garments of righteousness." Their discussions ranged far beyond literature. Ravenswood brought books on philosophy, Locke and Rousseau, Hume and Berkeley. They debated the nature of knowledge, the origin of ideas, the relationship between reason and faith. Eleanor discovered that she had opinions on these matters, strong opinions that she had never had the opportunity to articulate. With Ravenswood, she could explore the furthest reaches of her intellect without fear of censure. He also taught her about the world beyond England's shores. He had traveled extensively in his youth, to France and Italy, to Greece and Egypt. He described the ruins of Rome, the canals of Venice, the breathtaking expanses of the desert. He spoke of different cultures, different ways of thinking, different possibilities for how a life might be lived. "Someday," Eleanor said wistfully during one of these discussions, "I should like to see such places. To stand before the Parthenon, to walk through the Forum, to see for myself all the wonders you describe." "Perhaps you shall," Ravenswood said, and something in his tone made Eleanor glance at him sharply. But he had already turned his attention back to the book before them, and the moment passed. Mary, initially nervous about the arrangement, gradually relaxed as she observed the propriety of their meetings. She would sit near the chapel door, working on her mending or reading her own simple books, always present but giving them the privacy necessary for genuine discourse. Sometimes Eleanor noticed Mary smiling as she listened to their discussions, and once or twice the maid had even offered her own observations, which Ravenswood received with perfect courtesy. As the weeks passed, however, Eleanor became aware of a shift in the nature of her feelings for the Duke. What had begun as gratitude and intellectual admiration was deepening into something more profound and more dangerous. She found herself thinking of him during the long hours between their meetings, replaying their conversations, remembering the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the sound of his laughter, the warmth in his voice when he praised her insights. She began to notice small details, the way a lock of his hair fell across his forehead when he leaned over a text, the elegant shape of his hands as he turned pages, the subtle scent of sandalwood and leather that clung to his clothes. During their discussions, she became hyper-aware of his proximity, of the mere inches that separated them when they sat side by side examining a passage. This was madness, Eleanor told herself firmly. He was a duke, and she was the despised daughter of a minor baronet. He was wealthy, titled, sought after by every ambitious mother in England. She was hidden away like a shameful secret, considered unmarriageable due to her peculiar interests. Whatever kindness he showed her, whatever pleasure he took in their intellectual companionship, it could never be more than that. To imagine otherwise was to invite heartbreak. But the heart, Eleanor discovered, was not subject to the dictates of reason. Despite her best efforts to maintain proper emotional distance, she was falling in love with Alexander Ravenswood. And the terrible, wonderful, impossible truth was that she suspected he might be falling in love with her as well. The signs were subtle at first. Ravenswood began to arrive at their meetings earlier, as though eager to see her. His smiles became warmer, more personal. He started bringing small gifts, a rare first edition, a volume of poetry by a French author he thought she would enjoy, a beautiful bookmark of tooled leather. These were still appropriate gifts from a teacher to a student, but there was something in the way he presented them, in the way his fingers lingered when hers touched his during the exchange, that suggested deeper feelings. Their discussions, too, took on a more personal cast. They still spoke of literature and philosophy, but increasingly they shared details of their own lives, their own experiences and emotions. Ravenswood told her about his childhood, about the loneliness of being raised for duty rather than affection, about the weight of expectations that had shaped his entire existence. "I was groomed from birth to be the perfect duke," he said one afternoon, his voice tinged with bitterness. Every action, every word, every thought was measured against the standard of what was expected. I was not permitted to be simply Alexander. I had to be Thornfield, the title, the legacy, the embodiment of generations of aristocratic tradition. It was suffocating. "Is that why you never married?" Eleanor asked, emboldened by his openness. "Partly," he admitted. "Every woman presented to me was assessed for her suitability as a duchess, not for her qualities as a person. I was expected to choose based on bloodline and dowry, not on compatibility or affection. I found the entire process repugnant and refused to participate. My family considered me difficult, obstinate, selfish. Perhaps I was. But I could not bring myself to trap some innocent woman in a loveless marriage of convenience." "That was noble of you," Eleanor said softly. "Was it? Or was it merely cowardice? I had the luxury of refusing because of my position. Most people do not have such freedom." Eleanor thought of her own situation, of the prison her life had become. "No," she agreed quietly. "Most of us do not." Their eyes met, and the moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Ravenswood looked as though he wished to say something more, but instead he cleared his throat and returned his attention to the book before them. But Eleanor could not so easily dismiss what she had seen in his eyes, a longing that mirrored her own, a connection that transcended the roles of teacher and student. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. She knew that this path led nowhere good. Even if Ravenswood harbored feelings for her, what future could they possibly have? A duke did not marry the despised daughter of a country baron, particularly not one considered eccentric and unsuitable. Yet knowing this did not stop her heart from racing when he smiled at her, did not prevent the warmth that flooded through her when his hand accidentally brushed hers, did not diminish the ache of longing when their meetings ended and she had to return to the suffocating confines of Ashworth Manor. Mary, observant as always, noticed the change in the atmosphere between them. One afternoon, as they walked back from the chapel, she spoke carefully. "Miss Eleanor, I hope you're being careful with your heart." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do, miss," Mary said gently. "I've seen the way you look at him, and the way he looks at you. I don't judge. He seems a good man, and heaven knows you deserve some happiness. But he's a duke, miss. And you're—" "I know what I am," Eleanor interrupted, more sharply than she intended. Then, more softly, "I know, Mary. I haven't forgotten reality. But for these few hours each week, can I not pretend? Can I not simply enjoy the conversation, the learning, the companionship, without constantly reminding myself of all the reasons it cannot last?" Mary sighed, but said no more. Eleanor was grateful for her discretion, even as she knew her maid was right to worry. This situation was becoming increasingly complicated, increasingly dangerous, not just to her reputation but to her heart. The turning point came on a golden October afternoon when the chapel was filled with slanted sunlight that turned the dust motes into dancing stars. They had been discussing Dante's Divine Comedy, and Eleanor had become quite animated in her interpretation of Beatrice as more than mere muse. "She represents the elevation of human love to divine love," Eleanor argued, her eyes bright with passion. "Dante shows us that earthly affection, properly directed, can lead us toward the ultimate good. It's a radical notion, that romantic love need not be separate from spiritual love, that they can be one and the same." "You have a romantic heart," Ravenswood observed, and there was something in his voice that made Eleanor's pulse quicken. "Perhaps I do," she admitted. "Is that foolish of me?" "Not foolish. Human." He set down the book and turned to face her fully. "Eleanor, these weeks with you have been the most intellectually stimulating, the most genuinely enjoyable of my life. Your mind is extraordinary, but more than that, your spirit, your passion for learning, your courage in pursuing knowledge despite every obstacle, you humble me." Eleanor's breath caught. "Your Grace." "Alexander," he corrected softly. "When we are alone, call me Alexander. I am weary of titles and formality. With you, I can be simply myself, and that is a gift beyond price." "Alexander," she whispered, tasting his name on her tongue, finding it sweet. He reached out and took her hand, a gesture far more intimate than any they had previously shared. Mary, sitting by the door, looked up with alarm but did not intervene. "I must speak plainly," Ravenswood said, his gray eyes searching Eleanor's face. "I have tried to maintain proper boundaries, to remember my position and yours, to content myself with intellectual companionship. But I find I cannot. Eleanor, you have become infinitely precious to me. The thought of these lessons ending, of losing access to your mind and your presence, is unbearable." Eleanor's heart was pounding so hard she felt dizzy. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I have fallen in love with you," he declared, his voice rough with emotion. "Deeply, irrevocably in love. I know the obstacles. I am not blind to them. But I also know that what we have found together is rare and precious. I do not wish to lose it. I do not wish to lose you." Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes. "I love you too," she confessed, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I have tried not to, have told myself it was impossible, improper, foolish. But I cannot help it. You have shown me kindness when I knew only censure, have valued my mind when my own family despised it, have made me feel, for the first time in my life, that I matter. How could I not love you?" Ravenswood stood abruptly and pulled her to her feet, drawing her close. For a moment, Eleanor thought he might kiss her, and she would not have stopped him. But instead, he pressed her hand to his heart, letting her feel its frantic beating. "We must be sensible," he said, though his voice suggested he felt anything but sensible. "We must think carefully about what happens next. Your family will not approve." "My family will be horrified," Eleanor said bluntly. "They will accuse me of entrapment, of using improper means to secure an advantageous match. They will never believe that a duke could genuinely care for me." "Then we must make them believe it," Ravenswood said firmly. "Eleanor, I am not a man who acts on impulse. I have considered this from every angle. Yes, there will be scandal. Yes, society will gossip. But I am the Duke of Thornfield. I have enough influence to weather such storms. And you are worth any amount of social inconvenience. But your family, your position, will survive my choice of bride," he finished. "Eleanor, I have spent my entire life doing what was expected of me. I have been the dutiful son, the responsible heir, the proper duke. But in doing so, I have been profoundly unhappy. You have shown me what life could be if I had the courage to choose my own path. Will you help me find that courage? Will you consider becoming my wife?" Eleanor stared at him, unable to comprehend what she was hearing. Marriage. He was proposing marriage. To her, the hidden daughter, the family embarrassment, the woman who was supposed to be unmarriageable. "You cannot mean this," she whispered. "I have never meant anything more in my life," he assured her. "I love you, Eleanor Ashworth. I love your brilliant mind and your passionate spirit. I love the way you argue about poetry and the light in your eyes when you discover a new idea. I love your courage in defying convention to pursue what you believe in. You are exactly the woman I have been searching for, and I will not let the accidents of birth and circumstance keep us apart." "My parents will never consent," Eleanor said, even as hope bloomed wildly in her chest. "Your parents may surprise you," Ravenswood replied. "I am, after all, a duke, and however much they may disapprove of your interests, they cannot be entirely immune to the prospect of having a duchess for a daughter. We shall approach them formally, properly, with all the respect due to their position. I will make it clear that my intentions are entirely honorable, that I have fallen in love with their daughter through correspondence about literature, which is essentially true, if not entirely complete." "You would lie to them?" "I would protect you," he corrected. "There is no need to mention our meetings here, no need to expose Mary to potential censure. We shall tell them that we met briefly when I stayed at the manor, that I was impressed by your intellect, that we have exchanged letters since then. Such courtships are not uncommon among the aristocracy." Eleanor's mind raced. It could work. It was mad, implausible, but it could work. And even if it didn't, even if her parents refused, she would at least have had this moment. This incredible, impossible moment when a duke told her he loved her and wanted to make her his duchess. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Alexander. I will marry you. If you truly mean it, if this is not some elaborate jest or temporary madness, then yes, with all my heart." His face transformed with joy, and this time he did kiss her, a gentle, reverent press of lips that nonetheless sent fire through Eleanor's veins. It was her first kiss, and it was perfect. From the doorway came a discreet cough. Mary stood there, her face a mixture of delight and worry. "Begging your pardons," she said, "but if we're to maintain the fiction that nothing improper has occurred, perhaps we should observe some discretion." Ravenswood laughed and stepped back, though he kept Eleanor's hand clasped firmly in his. "You are quite right, Mary. Thank you for your vigilance. And thank you for making these meetings possible. When Eleanor and I are wed, you shall have a position in our household for as long as you wish it." Mary bobbed a curtsy, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you, Your Grace. That's most generous." They spent the remainder of the afternoon planning their approach to Lord and Lady Ashworth. Ravenswood would call at the manor in 2 days' time, requesting a private audience with Eleanor's father. He would present himself as a suitor who had been captivated by Eleanor during his brief stay and had subsequently been corresponding with her, a correspondence that Eleanor would need to fabricate evidence of, just in case. "Write me letters," Ravenswood instructed. "Date them over the past weeks. Discuss literature, ideas, anything you like. I will do the same. If your parents ask to see proof of our courtship, we shall have it." It was a conspiracy, a deception, but Eleanor could not bring herself to feel guilty. Her entire life had been shaped by deceptions. Her family's pretense that she didn't exist, society's pretense that women didn't need education, the great collective pretense that status mattered more than character. If she and Ravenswood had to engage in a little harmless fiction to secure their happiness, surely that was a minor sin. As they parted that afternoon, Ravenswood held Eleanor close once more. 2 days, he murmured against her hair, "and then we begin the campaign to make you my Duchess." "It still seems impossible," Eleanor confessed. "Then we shall make the impossible real," he replied. "Together." The 2 days passed in a fever of anxiety and preparation. Eleanor spent hours composing letters that she then aged with careful handling and strategic placement in sunlight to fade the ink slightly. She wrote about books, about ideas, about her dreams and fears, crafting a correspondence that would convince even the most skeptical parent that a genuine intellectual and emotional connection had developed between herself and the Duke. She also had to manage her own appearance for the momentous interview. With Mary's help, she selected her finest dress, a gown of deep burgundy silk that had been made for her years ago but rarely worn. Mary dressed her hair with unusual care, weaving in a ribbon that brought out the warm tones in her brown tresses. "You look beautiful, miss," Mary said softly. "Like a duchess already." Eleanor studied her reflection and barely recognized the woman looking back. There was color in her cheeks, hope in her eyes, a confidence in her bearing that had been absent for years. Love, she realized, had transformed her in ways that went far beyond the physical. When Ravenswood's carriage arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, Eleanor watched from her window as he descended. He was dressed formally, every inch the aristocratic gentleman come to call. Her heart swelled with love and pride. This magnificent man wanted her, chose her, was willing to face her family's disapproval and society's censure for her sake. The butler announced him, and Eleanor heard her mother's confused, delighted exclamation, "The Duke of Thornfield!" "But what, Catherine, quickly, change into your green silk. Why did no one inform me he was calling?" There was a flurry of activity in the drawing-room below. Eleanor remained in her chamber as arranged, waiting for the summons that would indicate Ravenswood had requested to see her. Her hands trembled as she clutched the packet of fabricated letters, her lifeline and her proof. After what seemed an eternity, Mary appeared at the door. "Your father requests your presence in the library, miss. The Duke is with him." Eleanor descended the stairs on shaking legs. The entire household seemed to be watching her progress, servants peering from doorways, her mother and Catherine hovering anxiously in the hallway outside the library. Lady Ashworth looked utterly bewildered. "Eleanor, what is the meaning of this? The Duke has asked to speak with you. Have you? Did you somehow meet him during his previous visit? Why was I not informed?" "All will be explained, mamma," Eleanor said with a calmness she did not feel. She knocked on the library door, and her father's gruff voice bade her enter. Lord Ashworth sat behind his massive desk, looking both confused and oddly pleased. Ravenswood stood by the window, and when Eleanor entered, his face lit with such genuine affection that she felt her courage strengthen. "Eleanor," her father began, his tone uncharacteristically gentle, "the Duke of Thornfield has just made the most extraordinary request. He wishes to court you with the intention of marriage. He claims you have been corresponding for several weeks, and that he has developed a deep admiration for your mind and character." Eleanor curtsied to her father, then to Ravenswood. "That is correct, Papa. But how?" Lord Ashworth sputtered. "When did this courtship begin? Why was I not informed?" Ravenswood stepped forward smoothly. "The fault is entirely mine, Lord Ashworth. During my brief stay at your manor, I had the pleasure of encountering Miss Eleanor in your library. We discussed literature, and I was struck by her remarkable intellect and sensibility. Before I departed, I took the liberty of leaving my card and suggesting we might correspond. Miss Eleanor, being properly cautious, consulted with her maid about the propriety of such correspondence. I understand she debated whether to inform you, but feared you might consider my interest presumptuous given our brief acquaintance. It was a masterful performance, staying close enough to the truth to be plausible while omitting the clandestine meetings that would have scandalized her parents." Eleanor produced the packet of letters with steady hands. "We have indeed been corresponding, Papa. Here is proof, if you wish to examine it. The Duke has been gracious enough to discuss literature and ideas with me. I did not mention it to you because I feared you would disapprove, given your feelings about my intellectual interests." Lord Ashworth took the letters, glancing through them with an expression of increasing astonishment. Eleanor held her breath, praying that her fabrications would pass muster. Her father was not a stupid man, and if he looked too closely, he might notice discrepancies. But Lord Ashworth was also a practical man, and the prospect of having the Duke of Thornfield as a son-in-law was clearly overwhelming his critical faculties. He set the letters down and looked at Ravenswood with something approaching awe. "Your Grace, I confess I am astounded. My daughter Eleanor has been a source of considerable concern to this family. Her peculiar interests, her unwomanly desire for education, we had thought her quite unmarriageable. That you should seek her hand is beyond anything we could have imagined." "Then you have underestimated your daughter, sir," Ravenswood said firmly. "Miss Eleanor's intelligence and erudition are not flaws but virtues. In an age when most young ladies concern themselves only with fashion and gossip, she has cultivated her mind and soul. She is extraordinary, and I would be honored to make her my Duchess." Eleanor saw her father struggle with this radical revaluation of the daughter he had dismissed and hidden. Slowly, almost reluctantly, something like respect entered his expression. "I do not pretend to understand it," Lord Ashworth said finally. "But if your Grace truly wishes to marry Eleanor, I can hardly object. The connection would be advantageous for our family, and if you are satisfied with her peculiarities, then I suppose they are your concern now rather than mine." It was hardly a ringing endorsement, but it was consent none the less. Eleanor felt tears of relief prick her eyes. "Thank you, Papa," she said softly. "Yes, well." Lord Ashworth cleared his throat awkwardly. "Your mother will be beside herself. She has been trying to marry off Catherine, and here you go, securing a duke. I don't understand the world any more." Ravenswood smiled. "Perhaps, Lord Ashworth, you might consider that the world is changing. Women like your daughter represent the future, educated, thoughtful, capable of being true partners rather than mere ornaments. I count myself fortunate to have found such a woman." After a few more formalities, Eleanor was dismissed to inform her mother of the engagement while Ravenswood and her father discussed settlements and arrangements. She found Lady Ashworth in the drawing-room, practically vibrating with curiosity and anxiety. "Well?" her mother demanded. "What did your father say? Why does the Duke wish to speak with you?" "He has asked me to marry him, Mamma," Eleanor said, still hardly believing the words. "And Papa has given his consent." The effect on Lady Ashworth was dramatic. She swayed, clutched at a chair for support, and then, quite suddenly, burst into tears. "Marry you? The Duke of Thornfield wishes to marry you? But this is impossible. You have been— Oh, Eleanor!" Catherine, who had been listening from the doorway, rushed in with an expression of hurt bewilderment. "But why would he choose Eleanor over me? I am prettier, younger, more accomplished in the feminine arts. It makes no sense." "Apparently," Eleanor said with quiet dignity, "His Grace values intellectual accomplishment above the ability to play the pianoforte or paint watercolors." Lady Ashworth recovered her composure with visible effort. "Well, this is most unexpected." "Most unexpected indeed. But, Eleanor, if you are to be a duchess, we must do something about your appearance, your wardrobe, your entire manner of presenting yourself. You cannot meet society looking like a dowdy bluestocking." Eleanor felt a flash of anger. Even now, even in this moment of triumph, her mother could not accept her as she was. But Ravenswood's words echoed in her mind. "You are extraordinary." She drew herself up, meeting her mother's eyes steadily. "I am who I am, Mamma. The Duke of Thornfield loves me for my mind and my character. If society finds me wanting, that is society's failure, not mine." For a moment, mother and daughter stared at each other, and Eleanor saw something shift in Lady Ashworth's expression. Perhaps not acceptance, but at least a grudging acknowledgment that her despised daughter had somehow, against all odds, secured the most advantageous match imaginable. "Very well," Lady Ashworth said stiffly. "I suppose a duchess may dress and behave as she pleases. We shall announce the engagement immediately. Oh, what will Lady Pemberton say? Her daughter married a mere baron, and mine will be a duchess." And there it was. Her mother's primary concern was not Eleanor's happiness, but the social elevation the match would bring. Eleanor felt a pang of sadness, but it was tempered by the knowledge that soon she would leave Ashworth Manor forever, would begin a new life with a man who truly valued her. The engagement was announced, and the reactions ranged from astonishment to skepticism to outright disbelief. Society could not fathom why the Duke of Thornfield, one of England's most eligible bachelors, would choose the obscure, peculiar Eleanor Ashworth over the countless beautiful and accomplished young ladies who had been vying for his attention for years. The gossip was merciless. Whispers circulated that Eleanor must have entrapped him somehow, that there must be some scandalous secret forcing the match, that the Duke had clearly taken leave of his senses. Eleanor endured it all with as much grace as she could muster, taking comfort in Ravenswood's unwavering support. He called at Ashworth Manor frequently now, and the hours they spent together were precious beyond measure. No longer confined to stolen meetings in an abandoned chapel, they could sit together openly in the drawing-room, though always under the watchful eyes of Eleanor's mother. They continued to discuss books and ideas, but now they also talked about their future, the life they would build together, the home they would make, the possibility of children who would inherit both their intellect and their passion. "I want our daughters to have the education you were denied," Ravenswood said one afternoon as they walked in the gardens under Mary's discreet supervision, "and our sons to value learning in women as much as in men. We shall raise them differently, Eleanor. We shall teach them that minds have no gender, that knowledge is for all who seek it." "You make it sound like a crusade," Eleanor said with a smile. "Perhaps it is," he replied seriously. "One couple cannot change society, but we can change our corner of it. We can model a different way of being, a partnership of true equals. Perhaps, in time, others will follow our example." Eleanor squeezed his hand, her heart overflowing with love for this man who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. "I love you," she said simply. "And I love you," he replied. more than I knew it was possible to love another person. The wedding was planned for December, a quiet ceremony given the rushed nature of the engagement. Lady Ashworth had wanted a grand affair, but Ravenswood insisted on something more intimate, and his wishes, as a duke, were not to be denied. Eleanor was grateful. She had no desire to be put on display for society's judgment. As the wedding day approached, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. Months ago, she had been a prisoner in her own home, her dreams dismissed, her intellect despised, her future bleak. Now she stood on the threshold of a new life, not just as a wife but as a partner, not just as a duchess but as a woman valued for who she truly was. The night before the wedding, Mary helped Eleanor pack her belongings. Among her possessions was the worn volume of Browning's poetry that had sustained her through the darkest days. "Will you bring it with you, miss?" Mary asked. "Of course," Eleanor replied. "It reminds me of what I survived, what I overcame. And besides," she added with a smile, "it's beautiful poetry. I shall always treasure it." "You're going to be so happy," Mary said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You deserve it, Miss Eleanor. You deserve every bit of happiness that's coming to you." "Thank you, Mary," Eleanor said warmly. "For everything. For saving my book, for helping me meet Alexander, for being my friend when I had so few. I shall never forget your kindness. You were always kind to me, miss, even when you had no reason to be," Mary replied. "That's how I knew you were special." The wedding day dawned cold and clear, the December sun painting the world in shades of gold and white. Eleanor stood before the mirror in her chamber, barely recognizing the woman in the wedding gown of ivory silk. Mary had woven flowers into her hair, and she wore the Thornfield diamonds that had been delivered by Ravenswood's man of business, a necklace and earrings of breathtaking beauty. But it was not the finery that made her look different, Eleanor realized. It was the joy radiating from within, the confidence that came from being truly loved, the knowledge that she was embarking on a life that would allow her to be fully herself. The ceremony took place in the village church, attended by immediate family and a few close friends. Lord and Lady Ashworth looked simultaneously proud and bewildered. Catherine, having gotten over her initial jealousy, seemed genuinely happy for her sister. The congregation was small, but Eleanor would not have changed a thing. And then Ravenswood was there, standing at the altar in his formal attire, his eyes fixed on her with such love and devotion that Eleanor felt tears blur her vision. She walked down the aisle on her father's arm, every step carrying her away from her past and toward her future. The vicar spoke the ancient words, binding them together for all eternity. Ravenswood's voice was steady and sure as he made his vows, and Eleanor's voice was equally firm as she pledged herself to him. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, she felt the symbolic weight of it, not a shackle but a promise, not a cage but an opening into possibility. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the vicar declared, and Ravenswood kissed her with a tenderness that made Eleanor's heart soar. They were married. She was a duchess. But more importantly, she was free, free to learn, to think, to be herself without shame or censure. The woman who had been hidden away, despised for her intellectual hunger, had found not just love but liberation. The wedding breakfast was a modest affair, and soon Eleanor and Ravenswood were departing for Thornfield Hall, his ancestral estate. As the carriage pulled away from Ashworth Manor, Eleanor looked back at the house that had been her prison for so long. She felt no regret at leaving it behind. "Any second thoughts?" Ravenswood asked, taking her hand in his. "None whatsoever," Eleanor replied. "Only excitement for what comes next." "You shall have your own library at Thornfield," he told her. "It's 3 times the size of your father's, with volumes collected over generations. And you may use it whenever you wish, for as long as you wish, without anyone daring to suggest you should be doing something more appropriate." Eleanor laughed. "I may never leave it." "I am counting on that," he said with a smile. I plan to spend many hours there with you, discussing books and arguing about interpretations and simply enjoying your company. That is the life I want, Eleanor, one of intellectual companionship and mutual respect, of shared passions and equal partnership. It is the life I have always wanted, Eleanor confessed. I just never dared to imagine I might actually have it. You shall have it, Ravenswood promised. Every day, for the rest of our lives. The journey to Thornfield took several hours, and they spent it talking and reading together, beginning their married life exactly as they intended to continue it, in conversation, in companionship, in love. When Thornfield Hall came into view at last, Eleanor gasped at its grandeur. It was a magnificent estate, with ancient stone walls and soaring towers, surrounded by extensive gardens and parkland. "It's overwhelming," she admitted. "I never imagined living in such a place." "It's just a house," Ravenswood said. "Rather large and drafty, with too many servants and too much history. But with you in it, it will finally become a home." The staff lined up to greet their new Duchess, and Eleanor was touched by their warmth and genuine welcome. The housekeeper, a kindly woman named Mrs. Hartwell, showed Eleanor to her chambers, a magnificent suite with windows overlooking the gardens and a small private sitting-room. "And next door are His Grace's chambers," Mrs. Hartwell explained. "With a connecting door, of course." Eleanor blushed at the implication, but Mrs. Hartwell's eyes were kind. After the housekeeper departed, Eleanor explored her new domain, marveling at the luxury surrounding her. But what drew her most was the bookshelves already installed in her sitting-room, filled with volumes chosen specifically for her. Ravenswood appeared in the connecting doorway, having changed out of his formal attire into more comfortable clothing. "I had those brought up for you," he said. "But they're just a sampling. The library awaits whenever you're ready to explore it." "Take me there now," Eleanor said eagerly. "Please, I cannot wait another moment." He laughed and offered his arm. "Then come, my Duchess. Let me show you your new kingdom." The library was everything he had promised and more, a vast room lined floor to ceiling with books, with comfortable chairs and reading nooks, large windows letting in abundant light, and several desks for study and writing. Eleanor turned in slow circles, trying to take it all in. "It's paradise," she breathed. "It's yours," Ravenswood replied. "All of it. Every book, every comfortable chair, every quiet corner. This is your space, Eleanor. Your sanctuary. No one will ever again tell you that you cannot read, cannot learn, cannot pursue knowledge. Those days are behind you." Eleanor threw her arms around his neck, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me, for valuing me, for loving me as I am." "Thank you for letting me," he replied, holding her close. "Thank you for your courage, your brilliance, your passionate heart. You have given me something I never thought to find, a true partner, an intellectual equal, a woman who challenges and inspires me. I am the fortunate one in this marriage, Eleanor. Never doubt that." They stood together in the library, surrounded by thousands of volumes representing centuries of human thought and creativity, and Eleanor felt a peace settle over her soul. This was where she belonged. This was the life she was meant to lead. And this man holding her was the partner she had been unknowingly waiting for all her life. "Shall we read together?" Ravenswood suggested. "There's a new work I've been eager to discuss with you, Charlotte Bronte's latest. I think you'll find much to admire in her depiction of intellectual women." "I would love that," Eleanor said. "But Alexander—" She paused, still getting used to the intimacy of using his given name. "Before we begin, there's something I need to say." "What is it, my love?" "For so long, I believed that my desire for learning was a curse, that something was fundamentally wrong with me for wanting what I wanted. My family made me feel ashamed, broken, lesser. But you have shown me that I was never broken. Society was broken for trying to confine me. You have given me not just love but validation, not just a home but freedom. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift." "You already are worthy," Ravenswood assured her. "You always were. It simply took the right person to see it. Now come, let us begin our life together the way we mean to continue it, with books, with conversation, with the joy of shared discovery." They settled into adjacent chairs by the fire, each with a volume in hand, reading in comfortable silence until one or the other found a passage worth discussing. Outside, the winter afternoon faded into evening, but within the library, time seemed suspended, irrelevant. They were together, they were free, and they were home. Years passed in contentment and intellectual fulfillment. Eleanor flourished as the Duchess of Thornfield, using her position to advocate for women's education and supporting schools for girls. She and Ravenswood became known for their progressive views and their genuine partnership, a marriage of true minds as well as hearts. They had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, all of whom were encouraged to read widely, think critically, and question convention. The Thornfield Library became famous in intellectual circles, and Eleanor hosted salons where women and men could discuss literature, philosophy, and social reform on equal footing. Eleanor never forgot the dark days at Ashworth Manor, the desperation of her imprisonment, the burning of her books. Those memories made her appreciate her freedom all the more keenly and fueled her determination to ensure that other young women would not suffer as she had. One autumn afternoon, many years after her wedding, Eleanor stood in the library with her eldest daughter, helping the girl select books for her studies at the women's college Eleanor and Ravenswood had helped establish. "Was it really so different when you were young, Mamma?" her daughter asked. "Were women truly forbidden from learning?" "Many were," Eleanor replied. "I was fortunate to eventually find escape, but countless others were not. That is why we must continue fighting, why we must use our privilege and position to open doors for those who come after us." "I shall," her daughter promised. "You and Papa have shown me what's possible when we refuse to accept unjust limitations." Eleanor smiled, her heart full. This was the legacy she and Ravenswood had built, not just a family but a vision of what the world could be when talent and passion were valued regardless of gender. That evening, as she and Ravenswood sat together in their favorite reading nook, she reflected aloud on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Marrying the peculiar daughter no one wanted? Taking on the scandal and the gossip?" "Never," Ravenswood replied without hesitation. "You are the best decision I ever made, Eleanor. These years with you have been the happiest of my life. You have made me a better man, a better duke, a better father. I am honored to be your husband." "And I am honored to be your wife," Eleanor said softly. "You saved me, Alexander. Not like a prince in a fairy tale saving a damsel. You saved me by seeing me, by valuing me, by showing me that I was never the problem. The cage was the problem, and you gave me the key to escape it." "We saved each other," he corrected. "I was living half a life before I met you, going through the motions of existence without truly living. You taught me what it means to engage fully with the world, to pursue passion and purpose, to build something meaningful. We are partners in every sense, Eleanor. That is our greatest triumph." She leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her like a warm tide. The hidden scholar had been found. The despised daughter had been cherished. And the woman who had been told she was too much, too intellectual, too curious, too unconventional, had discovered that she was exactly enough for the right person. In the library at Thornfield Hall, surrounded by books and bathed in firelight, Eleanor and Alexander Ravenswood continued reading, continued learning, continued building the life of shared minds and joined hearts that had seemed impossible when they first met by moonlight in a borrowed library so many years before. And they lived happily, intellectually, passionately ever after.